Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are going to start promptly. It's 10:01, so I'll dive in. My name is Senta Leslie. I'm the Associate Director of Eviction Prevention for the Department of Housing and Community Development. I'm joined by my two team members, Gabby Vasquez, who you'll be hearing from a little later in the webinar, and also Caroline Stokes, who is going to be fielding Q&A in the chat for us. So thank you all for giving your valuable time and interest to this initiative. I do want to just make very clear at the top of this webinar, the funds that we're discussing today are only available to organizations who are eligible to receive grant funding. So those organizations would be nonprofits, units of local government, and planning district commissions. If you are an individual who yourself is in need of help with rent or direct assistance, this is not the avenue that you need to use to get help. Instead, please email me directly. And Caroline, if you could drop my email address in the chat, and I can help direct you to the resources available at your local level. But again, this webinar is only for representatives from eligible organizations who are applying for grant funding. It is not for individuals who are in need of assistance with their rent. So with that, we will get started. Gabby, I think you're doing slides, right? Thank you. So yeah, if you have questions during this presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat. We do have breaks throughout this webinar for you all to unmute and address any Q&A, any questions that you may have. There's a few opportunities for that in the webinar and also at the end, but feel free to use the chat in between. So just a little bit of background about the Virginia Eviction Reduction Pilot. Its origination story is that Matthew Desmond, the author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning book Evicted, went on to win the MacArthur Genius Award. He used the funds associated with that award to launch the Princeton Eviction Lab. That was the very first time that our country had insight into the overwhelming crisis of evictions, and his data revealed that Virginia is home to 5 of the top 10 highest evicting large cities in America. So Virginia responded to that information under then Governor Northam and that particular General Assembly by passing $3.3 million to launch this pilot designed to get at the systemic reasons for why Virginia is on that top 10 list. So we did the first round of funding in 2020. That funding was running parallel to the Virginia Rent Relief Program and often acted as a supplement. In 2021, we launched the second year of that funding. The Rent Relief Program was beginning to phase out during that year. And we began to provide preference points to folks who were, to organizations who were also providing court navigation services. And we'll talk more about what those are later in this webinar. And then in 2022, a third year of funding was awarded. That what we call VERP 3.0 is runs on a 2-year grant cycle by calendar year. So it was for calendar year 2023 and calendar year 2024. The reason why we're here today is that one of the grantees that we had awarded funding for this calendar year made a strategic decision to step back from all eviction-related work and focus more closely on their core mission. So as a result, we have this supplemental funding that's available, which is what we're here to talk about today, $465,000. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview, we understand that Virginia's eviction crisis, our nation's eviction crisis, is not a character flaw of the individuals experiencing eviction. It is a flaw of the system that those folks interact with. And so while this grant opportunity does allow organizations to provide flexible, we emphasize the flexible part of the financial assistance available. We also require that our grantees take steps to address the issue at a systemic level. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but it does include working with the stakeholders in your local community who have the potential to disrupt or interrupt the cycle, the revolving door cycle of eviction. So that would include landlords, folks who work in the court system, your local legal aid office, other pro bono attorneys, partnerships with schools, but the goal being to create a coordinated system that prevents and diverts evictions whenever possible. Our goal, our vision is that Virginia will become a place where evictions are rare. And when they cannot be prevented, that the experience will be the impact will be brief and the experience will be humane. And so all of those stakeholders we expect you to partner with should have the ability to play a role in, one of those three areas. I already mentioned this is a 2-year funding cycle, and this is just kind of an outlier supplemental opportunity. I think I've mentioned actually everything on this slide. So the budget language that launched VERP does require us to provide some preference points to certain localities. All of those localities are listed here on the slide. And if you are proposing to provide service in any of these localities, you would receive preference points. I do want to point out that we have 6 existing grantees. Those grantees will also be receiving a scoring preference for this supplemental round of funding. And the localities that they serve are those which are highlighted in yellow on this screen. So if you're joining by phone and can't see the screen, that's Chesapeake, Hampton, Newport News, Norfolk, and Portsmouth. At the bottom of this slide, you also see that we will only fund 1 grantee per locality. However, more than 1 application from the same locality is welcome to apply. But when it comes to these localities that are highlighted in yellow, there's already a grantee serving those communities. So we would not be awarding funding to an additional organization to provide additional services in Chesapeake, Hampton, Newport News, Norfolk, or Portsmouth. Next slide, please. Charlottesville. Okay, thank you I saw that question in the chat. So if you could go back to the previous slide, Gabby. The localities that you see on this slide are the localities that would receive preference points. This is not an all-inclusive list of the localities where VERP is available. These are localities that the General Assembly has required us to provide preference points to. But we have VERP grantees who are serving Southwest Virginia. We have a grantee serving Charlottesville and the surrounding area. This slide is only intended to point out the localities that would receive preference points and highlighting those among those localities that would receive preference points, highlighting those that already have a VERP provider receiving funding. Next slide. So we do not require a match. However, applicants who can provide documentation of match, either in kind or a cash match, will be given a scoring preference. This is also part of the state budget directive. If you are in a community that still has any local COVID or other emergency resources, those can count towards the local match commitment. However, and there's a reason this is in bold, because sometimes applications come in without this. In order to receive the preference scoring for having a local match, your application must include MOUs, award letters, or letters of commitment, documentation that you have already received that match or that you have a commitment from a funding source to provide that match. So just including it in your budget alone or in a narrative question is not sufficient and will not get you the preference points. We need to see documentation and proof that that money has been committed. So we've talked about systems change a couple of times here. Sometimes this is a buzzword, and I think it's important for us to sort of name it so we all know what we're talking about, or at least what we mean when we talk about it. So rather than addressing the symptoms of the problem, such as large numbers of individuals experiencing an eviction, we really want this work to address the root causes of why so many people, why so many Black people, why so many children are experiencing an eviction. This work requires, organizations to make transformative adjustments to their own policies and practices, as well as to influence others like court systems, legal aid attorneys, landlords, to make adjustments and transformations to their policies and procedures. It's a collaborative effort. This is, I know one of the critiques of the rent relief program was that it was, I myself referred to it as the world's largest Band-Aid. This is more than just cutting a check for someone's rent. This work does require you to partner with the players who make up this system that we're operating in, and to influence the policies and practices at play. Next slide. So I want to take a moment to define what we mean by prevention and diversion. Both prevention and diversion activities are required in order to be eligible for this funding, but the way we define it in the eviction space is different than how it's defined in the homelessness space. So we define eviction prevention as services that happen before a household receives an unlawful detainer, also known as a UD. That's the point in the process of eviction where the court gets involved. So anything that can be provided before the court gets involved is preventative. And there's examples of what that looks like. It could be short-term financial assistance, case management to help with other resources like childcare, transportation, employment, or mediating between a tenant and a landlord before the landlord issues an unlawful detainer. Diversion services happen after that unlawful detainer has been issued. So that's after the point at which the court system is now involved. So examples of diversion activities also include short-term financial assistance. But this is really where you're going to see a lot more negotiation between landlords and tenants, which could include, negotiating payment plans, or we talked about how if it can't be prevented, we still want it to be the impact to be brief and the experience to be humane. So you might find a landlord that is unwilling to to drop the unlawful detainer, or just is insistent that the tenant move out. But you might be able to negotiate with them that, they dismiss the unlawful detainer and allow the tenant to leave without the permanent scarlet E on their record. This is also where court navigation plays a huge role. Legal aid or any local pro bono attorney would be an essential piece of the diversion work as well. Next slide. So I talked about this, and I'm just going to repeat it because I know some folks have joined very quickly. This supplemental funding opportunity is only available to the organizations that are listed on this slide. If you're calling in and can't see the slide, that means you must be a unit of local government or a nonprofit organization or a planning district commission in order to apply. Institutions of higher education can apply in collaboration with any of those. But the most important point I want everyone on the call to hear is that this webinar and this funding opportunity is not available to individuals who are in need of assistance with their rent. If you have joined this call because you need help with your rent, please email me instead. And Gabby or Caroline, if you could drop my email in the chat again, please email me and I will direct you to the resources available in your local community. But I do not want you to waste your time sitting through this webinar because as an individual in need of direct assistance, you are not eligible to apply through this avenue. And of course, all eligible entities must be registered in CAMS and not have any outstanding issues in CAMS. You're going to hear a lot more about CAMS from Gabby as soon as I'm done talking. So you'll all receive copies of this slide deck, but as I mentioned, you have to register in our centralized application and management system, also known as CAMS. That's an in-house DHCD grant management system. The relationships between all the partners that you talk about in your narrative must be backed up with MOUs or other formal agreements. You are allowed to have subgrantees. For example, if you're going to perform court navigation services, you're going to want to partner with legal aid or a pro bono attorney. You will need to provide an MOU or a formal agreement as part of your application. If you do not, we cannot give you points or credit for a partnership that you've talked about, but that you haven't demonstrated through formal documentation. And we can't enter into a contract with any agencies that have outstanding audit findings, IRS findings, DHCD monitoring findings, or any other compliance issues. So this is our first break for questions. I have not been keeping up with the chat. So if there are any outstanding questions that we need to answer at this point, Caroline, if there's anything in the chat, let me know, or if you'd like to take yourself off mute and ask a question now, you can.
So there are no questions in the chat, well, now there is. Since it's supplemental, what would be the grant term for this to qualify for supplemental funding? Oh, wait, sorry, those are two questions. Since it's supplemental, what would be grant terms for this round of funding? It's the first question.
Yeah, it's a great question and one that we anticipated. So we had not expected to issue this supplemental funding opportunity. As I stated, it's due to the fact that one of our grantees made a decision to step away from prevention-related work. So what I can say about the timeline is that applications are, of course, due on February 29th. Our team will review those as quickly as possible within a matter of days. At that point, our funding recommendations do go to the governor's office, and we lose control over the timeline at that point. So I cannot commit to, unfortunately, I cannot commit to when the funding will begin rolling. We hope that it is a very short turnaround time, but the funding will last until December 31st, 2024. The start date of the contract for this supplemental funding is to be determined because it requires a process that we're just not in control over at our level. And I understand that that's an imperfect answer and an imperfect process. It's just unfortunately the position that we're in due to an existing grantee exiting the work.
Cynthia, do you want me to read these questions or do you have access to them?
I see them now. Thank you. For this supplemental funding, do grantees have to be previous VERP recipients? You do not have to be, but we do want to make clear that our existing VERP grantees will receive preference points. I also see a question, what is the minimum and maximum dollar amount we can request? So the total amount available is $465,000. So that's the maximum that you can request. And the minimum would be set by you, but we encourage you to, thoughtfully articulate the real costs of the work that you're proposing to do. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Gabby now, who will lead the second half of the webinar, and Caroline will continue to monitor the chat, and we'll have additional breaks for questions. Thank you all.
Hi, everybody. Like Santa said, my name is Gabby, and I'm going to take us through a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of everything. So a change from calendar year 2023, or what we mean is VERP 3.0. The last time this grant was offered at a statewide level, we did not allow moving costs and application fees as allowable expenses. However, for this supplemental funding and for current grantees, they will know that we again allow moving costs and application fees as allowable expenses, however, only for participants whose incomes are between 31% and 80% AMI. And that is an attempt to not duplicate funding for prevention or other homelessness funds that can cover folks who are under 31% AMI for those moving fees. What's my mouse? Another change from VERP 3.0 is the court navigation for this supplemental funding will be an optional piece. So new applicants may not already have or not existing VERP grantees may not already have a court navigation program set up with MOUs and all these things in place, because that can take a bit. So for that reason, it's not required of new applicants. However, it is an eligible expense. So if you're a current grantee or if you are a new grantee and you do set up a court navigation program, you are still able to use these funds for that. And additionally, preference points will be given to applicants who do have a court navigation program. My mouse keeps. Okay, so the pilot program design, the activities must include, these next few slides are going to be very text heavy. And just a reminder that this will be going out, or this will be posted on the website. So feel free to not take any notes, but the activities will include the eviction prevention assistance, the eviction diversion assistance, the systems change partnerships that have been discussed, the optional court navigation piece, outreach and research, resource navigation, language access, inclusion of those with lived experience in the planning process and execution, coordination with partners and stakeholders, and referral protocols to eligible applicants to other sources of funding that may be helpful to them, like SNAP or TANF and the rest that are listed there. So to break down into to each of those pieces, what that looks like more, it was covered a little bit about the prevention and diversion. So, right, that's that difference between before the UD and after the UD or the unlawful detainer has been filed. And so that can look like financial assistance, stabilization support services, which are those flexible financial assistance pieces like childcare, medical bills, or transportation, and eviction diversion, which would support that legal aid and mediation and the court navigation, initiatives that promote systems change. So this will be realized in a local advisory committee that will be covered on a further slide, but that is one of the elements of the design that will help with this systems change piece. So to dig into the court navigation piece a little bit more, if as an applicant you do plan to include court navigation, these are what we expect for what that to look like. So again, it's an optional element for VERP supplemental funding, this tranche of funding. And the purpose is to increase communication between the judges, the eviction prevention and diversion staff, and assist tenants with navigating a court system that is not user-friendly. And activities can include, informing tenants of their resources, encouraging mediation, and other activities that are on site. And again, examples that are not limited to are helping them navigate the eviction process, what to expect going into the day, referring connections to legal aid lawyers or other sources of assistance, and then helping tenants complete court forms. These are just some of the examples of activities that are seen with court navigation and their current grantees. And like I've said, in order to receive the preference points for having a court navigation program, you must submit with the attachments those MOUs and any partnerships described through those forms, as well as your court navigation policies and procedures, which will be covered in the attachment slide. Continuing through the program design, outreach and resource navigation, we want to put the onus on us as the system and as the grantees and entities to proactively seek out those who are experiencing these evictions or traumas versus having someone in an emergency situation try to find out all of the resources available to them. We are also, language access should also be prioritized in program design and outreach strategies. Lived experience. So programs must provide opportunities for individuals with lived experiences, whether that be previously evicted, experience housing instability, to be involved with the development, implementation, and evaluation of their local VERP project. And again, there was referrals to SNAP, TANF, WIC, and LIHEAP, and the coordination with partners and stakeholders for the systems change. So the local VERP advisory committee is a required element of a VERP grantee, and it is a bulk of the coordination effort that comes with VERP. So the advisory committee must include representatives from the following, which is your local COC, workforce development, local DSS, legal aid, a representative of the district court or bar association, a representative of the public housing authority, representative of associations representing landlords such as realtors and apartment management associations, a housing counseling agency, a conflict resolution or alternate dispute resolution, a person with lived experience, organizations representing communities of color, an organization with experience serving non-English speakers or Spanish speakers or whatever is present in your local community, if you would know that best, and tenant advocacy group if they're present, as well as centers for independent living. And so the purpose of this advisory committee is to get all the players in the room to help with all phases. They've been helpful, whether it be planning, execution, evaluation, outreach. That can be a great resource for that aspect of the program. Eligible activities so these would be the actual budget line items in CAMS, our management system. So they're split under housing financial assistance, which would be the rent assistance and arrears, moving costs and application fees, that new piece, the stabilization support, which are the child care assistant, work supports, transportation, prevention activities, diversion activities, outreach and engagement, and admin costs, which would be 5% of the total funds expended at the end of the contract. Participant eligibility. So participants that to be eligible for the VERP program must be, we require grantees to use an eligibility form that we have designed, as well as a intake form that uses these factors as it calculates these as high risk factors for experiencing eviction. So we really want grantees to be targeting this resource assistance to those who really need it versus, everyone I'm sure really needs it. However, these are the risk factors we've identified as causing someone to be more at risk for an eviction or housing instability. We at VERP, we want grantees to take a housing first approach, which you may be familiar with already, but the approach is guided by this understanding that people need basic necessities like food and a place to live before attending to anything less critical, like getting a job or budgeting properly or attending substance use issues. So the assessment tools should use a housing first approach, and the spirit of the screening program is to really screen people in versus trying to screen them out based on lack of household income as a factor or other things. So you are not required to use, we have designed our intake and eligibility form. You may use your own, but they must have all of the elements that we have included in those required ones. So you will see those templates and be able to decide what works for you all. I'll pause there for any questions. I've seen sent in the chat. So if there's any questions in the chat or unmute, feel free.
There are no questions in the chat currently.
Thank you, Caroline. All right, I'll keep going. So for data collection and evaluation, the VERP team partners with RVA Eviction Lab to really combat this lack of data access that we have surrounding eviction in most states and localities. So you will be working with the RVA Eviction Lab as a program evaluator to help evaluate the impact of the VERP program. And so you will be expected to participate with the evaluator in data collection interviews and so on to evaluate the program's effectiveness.
Hey, Gabby, may I interrupt? There's
Yes.
a question in the chat. Oh, sorry, Cinta already answered it. Never mind.
Reporting. So because the supplemental funding is a little amorphous in its start time and the end time is December 31st, 2024. You will be required to submit up to 2 reports, whatever the grant cycle ends up looking like, but definitely a final report of the data. These reports, again, are used to impact or assess the impact of the program on a more quantitative level, while the eviction lab is more of a qualitative level experience. And so because we require this data, the grantees must be able to track and report on these program activities like participant data and spending separate from other activities. Overview of the application process. You are at the How to Apply webinar. Thank you for coming, and the application will close on February 29th at 11:59, and all applications must be submitted through that CAMS system. The next few slides are going to be very helpful to you, but not helpful to go through together. So these are more instructions on how to apply. So I'll just go through them. Tips for using CAMS. It will close, so probably work on it in a Word document and then paste them into there when you're ready to submit. And there are no, we can't take anything besides text responses. So if you have any graphics or charts that you would want to put that into an attachment, the optional attachment that is available. This is the project information you'll fill out. Again, we'll post this to the website, the budget, what it looks like in CAMS, the narrative questions. It looks like this. These are some of those attachments. You can see, I think I have a slide where this is more prominently written, so I'm not going to go through them here. Here we go. Required attachments, so updated versions of that language is more if you are a current grantee. The implementation timeline of the VERP supplemental funding, VERP policies and procedures. If you are submitting if you would like the preference points for court navigation, we would need those court navigator policies and procedures. The intake form, if you were going to use the DHCD template, that's optional. Same for the eligibility form. It's optional if you're using our template. And any MOUs, letters of commitments, or related agreements to those match points, to the court navigation, or any other partnerships that you may want to tell us about. The match documentation, the advisory committee, the list of who you would have to fill those requirements, and then optional attachments that would be where you would put those graphics or anything else you would like us to see. It will say on your end, it will say pending. Make sure you press save and submit. Those are two separate buttons in CAMS, and it will say incomplete. And it must say pending for us to get it. So make sure it says you have submitted it and it says pending. So the evaluation criteria, this is also in the program guidelines, which you should have received, and it's also on the website. But there'll be 20 points for the need, 40 points for the approach, 40 points also for capacity, and you can see in the scoring elements what that comprises of, and a successful grantee must get at least 60 points. And then the next slide has the total of the additional preference points. So we have the required ones as well as the ones we've discussed today, like the match, the regional scope, the more than one priority area, existing VERP grantees, and the court navigator points. This is just some data resources that might be helpful for you as you prepare your application and to be more data centric. And this is to know any technical assistance in CAMS, you would want to reach out to this CAMS help desk that only operates during 9 to 5. So you would want to make sure that you're during business hours. And then if you have any application specific questions, you can reach out to Senta Leslie. And I believe that's it. So if there are any final questions, chat activity that I missed, or please unmute. The questions that have been asked will be compiled and put on the website as with the we'll send out an email to everybody when all of this is updated onto the website, but we'll put the webinar recording, the webinar presentation, and all the questions that have been asked in both sessions as a FAQ document to help with any questions. But if there are no further questions, which I'm still patiently waiting, that's all we have for today. And thank you all for joining. And I really am looking forward to seeing any applications.
Thank you all, and just know that if you have any questions after this morning, like Gabby said, you can email me directly, and we will do our best to also include any questions I receive directly in the FAQ document we put on the website. So thank you all for your interest in this important work.